Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Howard Schimmel, Chief Research Officer of Turner Broadcasting System and ARF board member.
I thought the music was supposed to be Led Zeppelin. That's not Led Zeppelin. So good afternoon. You all get extra ARF points for staying towards the end. But we are almost at the end. But I actually think the ARF has scheduled this really well, and I think they've saved two amazing sessions for the last two. Hopefully you all were aware of the ARF Innovators A-List workshop that took place earlier. It was a great session. The fact that innovative new startup companies are able to sit with people who are established in the business and to dialogue in a way where we help these companies get a much better understanding of what we need from their products, I think is going to be an invaluable resource for all of us to take advantage of. What we wanted to do in the next session is we wanted to hear from people who are leading innovation in their organizations and hear what they're doing to stay relevant, what they're doing to drive a startup discipline throughout their companies. Our moderator is David Kohl, CEO of Morgan Digital Ventures. He's going to do the honors of introducing the panel. Please join me in welcoming Dave.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me. Cocked your head to the side and said I'm angry. 5 days since you laughed at me, saying get that together.
All right. Here we are, second to last event of the day. And like Howard, I think you guys get extra kudos. Thanks for sticking around. So what we're going to talk about today is how to stay relevant in business when your competition flies at the speed of startups. We all, I think, can agree it's a truism to say that innovation and company success go hand in hand, particularly in the media and entertainment industry. And speed to market is often the difference between companies that stand out, that compete well and succeed, and companies that don't. So what we want to do today, before I call up my panelists, is we want to test a little bit of a hypothesis with you, the audience. And that hypothesis is that there are 3 barriers to operating at the speed of startups, particularly for the large companies that don't have speed ingrained in their culture. And those 3 barriers are financial barriers, personal risk, and time. And so we want to do a little testing in the audience about how that works. And what I want to do is call up 2 of my panelists to ask questions they formulated to the audience. So the first is Steve Rosenblatt. He's president at Foursquare, responsible for revenue strategy and partnerships. Steve is also an ARF and MMA board member. Steve, why don't you stand up? Take it away. What's your question?
So this is my Ryan Seacrest moment here, coming out of the audience. We're going to reverse things a little bit. And I want to start out with a question. So I want a brave soul to raise their hand and talk to the audience about an example where they've been working with Fortune 100 companies, and they've seen what David said around innovation, where they've seen a company really institutionalize that innovation. So anyone, any brave souls? We got one right here. All right.
I actually want to put a question on the table for everyone in the room and our panelists, and that is, how do we, in large corporations, support middle-level managers to drive innovation, tap into innovative ideas, and support startups? So in response to your question, I've worked for several large corporations. I also currently run a small business that brings together the top marketing leaders from major B2B industries into groups for sharing ideas and practices. So I have a line of sight into companies like IBM, AIG, American Express, Tyco, Medtronic, and on. And 2 key tactics they use to drive innovation is their senior leaders model the behavior. And of course, that's driven from the top. And the second thing these large, successful, innovative companies do is incorporate metrics into their performance management systems so that innovation is really driven down through the organization. But I also wear another hat. So I advise one of the A-listed companies here, Maven Magnet, which is a startup. And in our experience, which is why I put the question on the table, when we go and we talk to middle-level managers, we're really not successful. But when we go and tap into the senior marketing leader with our offering, we close 85 to 90% of the time. So clearly, there is some divergence here between middle managers and their behaviors and senior level managers and theirs. And beyond the two points that I've made, I just wondered if the panelists would have some other tactics that they could share with us today.
I think we're
so I'll lay that on.
We're going to talk about that. Just your name real quick?
Ann Marshman.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Ann. I love that. So we've got two things we need to talk about today, metrics at the senior level and metrics that incentivize the middle level. Thank you for that. I want to introduce another panelist. Kristy Vance is Global Director of Connect in Unilever's Consumer and Marketing Insights Division. She also runs several big brand partnerships with the likes of Facebook, Google, and Twitter. So she's got that big company and, mature startup sentiment. Kristy, you had a question for the audience as well I'd like to hear.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. I first just want a show of hands. Who here has experience working with startups? Oh, amazing. That's excellent. All right, and then my second question, who here is a brave soul that in 60 seconds or less can talk to us about some of the complexities when it comes to working with a startup? Raise your hand if you want to talk some about that. All right, right here. Can we get a mic right here? Can you stand up and introduce yourself, tell us what company you're from, and then talk about those complexities?
Yes, I'm Carlos Fonseca. I head the marketing science area at MetLife Worldwide. A few comments on that. I think that the obstacles are multiple, but the rewards are also multiple. The first thing is how you pick the startups, and I think that the key is to develop a real concrete knowledge agenda, to be very aware as a company of the things that you want to develop in-house and the things that you're not ready to develop in-house, so you need to rent or to buy. So that gives you kind of like a north of where are you going to go. At MetLife, obviously, we have an investment portfolio, so to some extent we see these as investments that you kind of like do as part of our investment, but this is also a way to kind of like develop new things. One of the things that we do consciously once we do that is we make choices in terms of diversification. And that diversification has a lot to do with how insurance is going to change in the future. We know that we are ripe for disruption. So we start looking at things that we do, for example, in terms of biometrics, in terms of big data, and we pick those companies. First challenge is when you aim too high, sometimes your company and the traditional part of the company doesn't understand what you're talking about. The skill is so far that you have actually to translate those type of kind of like opportunity for them to understand. The second piece is how do you manage these startups? Because when you bring talent, sometimes that talent doesn't flourish inside the company. So you might kind of like be killing it. But at the same time, it goes both ways. Startups are immature in many ways, so they don't have an idea of what is their path for profitability. So what we try to do is to find this medium where they learn from us, but at the same time we learn from them. And that's the beginning of a journey. And it's a multi-year journey, and you need to have the stomach to invest long-term and have a kind of like a firm purpose to stay on course.
Great.
Thank you. So I'm going to take additional questions at the end. I want to thank, was it Carlos and Ann for volunteering in the beginning to ask and share. Thank you. And I'd like to also just get a quick round of applause for these guys as I invite up our two panelists and our additional two panelists. Come on up, gentlemen. I guess I will sit on here after everyone comes, pick a side. So joining me on stage are two more of our panelists. We have, sitting next to Kristy, Charlie Buchwalter. Now, Charlie's one of these career measurement guys. You probably know him from his early days at Nielsen. He's now president and CEO of Symphony Advanced Media. And next to me here is Jeff Graham, VP Market Insights and Analytics at Twitter. You all probably heard of Twitter, particularly as of late. Thank you all for coming. So the way we want to carry on the conversation is we learned just a few things in the audience, and we're going to give you guys another opportunity to talk with us. What I want to try to do with this panel is help us take away a few things that we can bring to offices tomorrow so that our companies can do a better job of operating at the speed of startups. Okay? So with that, might as well start over here since you're right next to me. We heard the following. I heard model and metrics from the top. I also heard from Ann, incentivize middle-level managers, empower them. We heard from Carlos, understand and have a knowledge in your company of where is it best to rent versus buy. In other words, where is it best to do something internally, or where do we need to partner, and treat investments with outsiders, with startups, for the long term. It's an investment strategy. It's not just a quick win strategy. As you think of your background coming into what is now a very large startup, but was at some point a startup, how do you react to some of those lessons that we're hearing from the audience?
So when I think about the difference between the way startups act and big companies act, having worked at both, startups are smaller, right? So there's fewer people. So one of the things I see as I get to larger companies is sometimes there's too many people working on stuff. So I think that's something we can take away, trying to keep things very small. And then having more of a tolerance for risk. And then when working with startups, really understanding that you have to give them a really strong reason to work with you because there's more risk on their side because they have fewer people working on projects.
So what I'm hearing, I think, is as a startup, when you go into a large organization, you're the sort of nimble, lean, mean, able to just get stuff done. There's 5 of you and there's 50 of them.
Right, you get chewed up. You can get chewed up really easily that way.
And so how do you overcome that? I mean, I understand the dynamic, but thinking again from your experience coming into the larger company, what were the things that you saw that really helped you overcome that disparity of your pace and speed and what might be seen as the slower machine?
So you're asking how, from a big company perspective, how to work better with startups as from a, or
I'll take it either way. I was actually thinking of the other way. How as a startup do you navigate the big company?
Yeah, I think you have to choose your partners well. I think that you have to find companies that are working like you, which have, companies that have a tolerance for risk, that are willing to work very quickly, and that are working to help you succeed. And yeah, I think we've all been in that situation where you get chewed up by a big process or by the slowness of a big company. So you kind of have to look and see if you see somebody that kind of looks like you in the mirror, and that's probably a good way to choose a partner.
Looks like you in the mirror. I like that. Before I go down the panel, just because Steve, you were out in the audience talking before, and also coming from, I'll say, the mature startup now at Foursquare, what's your experience with the same dynamic, trying to get into the large organization, integrate your services, and be successful?
Yeah, so I mean, this is my third startup, and one we sold to a big company called Apple, and so I spent 2 years integrating within Apple several years ago. So I think the important thing is one is focus. You got to stay focused on what it is you want and what it is you're trying to help the bigger company succeed at, as opposed to throwing lots of different things at them. 2 is passion. I think what you typically see in startups is this incredible passion, and that passion can get sucked away by within a big company, especially one that acquires or one that's trying to partner, right? You can see the passion just disappear from those people, and you don't want to do that, because one of the reasons people join startups is because they are passionate about building something. And I think the third, which you said earlier, is risk. You have to create a culture that accepts risk. If you don't get rewarded for taking risk and you get penalized for failing, you will never innovate to the point that you want to. So I think those are key learnings, both from building companies, selling companies to big companies, and integrating, that I think is really important.
Yeah, I used to come from a big company called Ernst & Young, and no one ever got fired for hiring Ernst & Young, whether or not we delivered a successful outcome. But I think what I'm hearing from you is in the startup dynamic, there's a culture that, well, if you're taking a risk with a young company, they got to be successful. And I think what I'm hearing is that we've got to overcome that and move into a zone where we're incentivizing folks to take the risk whether or not they're successful.
Failure is acceptable.
Failure is acceptable.
You can't learn and get to the next phase unless you fail once.
Before I move on, anyone else want to comment on that?
You know, I'd like to say just a couple of things, and I particularly responded to Ann, what you said about the disparity of selling to senior people versus mid-level people. You know, I think what Steve said has a lot to do with it. You know, one of the things, if you're lucky, that you can do with a startup is you have a great team of people that you really give a lot of leeway to. And you want them to make decisions because you know they probably know more than you do about certain areas. And if you can inculcate that kind of ability, there's nothing you really can't accomplish. And obviously, I think in larger companies, it's tougher to create that kind of mentality. There are companies that do it. And one of the things I also feel it's important to say is that all of our clients are media research types at broadcast and cable and studios. And the idea that big companies slow, startup fast, it's not really true at all. I mean, I can tell all the people that we work with, they are moving at the speed of light to the best of their ability. And I think the best thing we can do to support them is just to respond as quickly as we can because they're not always used to getting that kind of response. But I think that getting back to the main point here is the issue that finding enlightened management in a larger company that knows the value of energizing and delegating appropriately to the more junior people, amazing things can happen, and it just doesn't happen as much as you'd like to see.
I like that. I like that. Go ahead, Kristy.
Build on the comment about failure, because I think that that's what keeps a lot of people, not necessarily just big companies, but a lot of big people from partnering with startups, trying new things, is this huge fear of failure. What we like to think of at Unilever is in order to be most successful, you actually have to double your failure rate. So it's really this idea of get out there, explore, be inspired, don't be afraid to try new things. We like to think of it as rapid experimentation. And so you go out there, you have a new startup, a new pilot idea, you test it. If it fails, don't dwell on it. Learn from it, quickly move on to that next opportunity. And so really it is ingrained in the culture that we have. I mean, so much of it relies on the culture. If the culture within that company encourages really that idea of trying new things and not being afraid if it is going to fail, that goes a long way.
Yeah, and I think what makes that possible is the speed, because you can't work on something for 12 months and have it fail. It's a lot different. If you can get it failed in 6 weeks, you're in a lot better shape. So the kind of metabolism of decision making, and we have an idea on a Tuesday, let's get it launched on Thursday and see the results next Wednesday, as opposed to planning and alignment and all that type of stuff. I think that allows fast failure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying, but I'm going to put my big company hat on for a minute, even though now I'm also a startup, because it's wonderful to say, oh, just fail fast. Oh, just have a culture of experimentation. But that's really hard. Maybe you're lucky, and maybe that's why you're at Unilever, and that you're able to adopt that culture. And if I look back at your history with Nielsen and now at a smaller company playing in the space, and both you guys at very large startups, that culture doesn't always come so easy. So I'm kind of looking for the nugget here. I'm looking at the audience and saying, if you're part, just quick raise of hands, and I promise I will not write down the companies that raise their hands right now, but how many of you are sitting in companies where you're like, yeah, but we don't have that culture of go out and take risks. We don't have that culture of it's okay to fail. Come on, quick, just quick note. We're looking, oh, come on. If 2 companies raise their hands, I'm done with this panel. We're going home because you don't need any tips. The point is,
I see a lot of failures out there.
Yeah. So what creates that? What enables that? What's the secret sauce that we all can go back tomorrow morning and say, hey, it's Wednesday, and by Friday, this is going to change?
Yeah, I'll start, and then you guys can build. Since I was the one that's
you said, go ahead.
It's not easy, and it's not going to happen overnight, right?
I thought you just said it would have to happen overnight, fast.
No, experimentation happens overnight, but infusing that idea of being innovators, having that culture, that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take probably years. So sorry, those of you who raised your hands. It's probably going to take years in order to really instill that. But for those of you who are at the Innovators Workshop, apologies. I talked some about this, but it's so important to us at Unilever. I referenced this afternoon the Innovators Curve. And really it follows the 5 stages of grieving, where it starts first with denial, and then it ends in acceptance. And we really do believe that, and we follow that at Unilever. And what we look for are those early adopters, so those people who more quickly get to that acceptance stage. It's those people who we latch onto. It's those that we see the passion, we see the drive, and so we help them. They then help us in terms of pushing this culture forward, in terms of pushing new startups forward, in terms of rapid experimentation. And that's who we focus on, not the naysayers. We focus on those who have the same drive and the same passion that we have. Honestly, eventually, all those naysayers, they'll come around. They'll see how great it is, they'll see how successful it can be, and they then will eventually go from denial to acceptance. But it does take time.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion this morning and at our Innovators thing about the number of companies, how many companies have fallen off the Dow Jones Industrial. I mean, I don't know if you know, it's 30 companies now, it was 12 companies in 1898. There's only one company today that was there originally, and it turns over all the time. And look, there's a lot of different reasons why that happens. I'm pretty much convinced it has to do with enlightened management that has the ability to go with the flow, and through innovative thought process and emboldening people, they have the ability to move. You mentioned Nielsen. I've been away from Nielsen for a long time, so I don't really I compete with them, but I don't really know that much. But I have to tell you, I hear a lot of good things. You know, you have a guy like Mitch Barnes, I think is a good example of a guy who is he's a good guy. And he listens internally, he listens to clients. And, you know, I'm hearing from my clients, you know, that they're hearing that the Nielsen teams are listening a lot more to them, which is, you know, an interesting development. And I think that it really does boil down to the right management. My daughter works for LinkedIn. They just love Jeff Weiner. I mean, they will do anything for him because they just love the framework he set. So I think that's a big part of it.
Well, you know, I think if you think about, you know, you guys spent $1 billion or so on Dollar Shave Club, and Walmart just spent $3 billion on Jet. So, and that's brilliant because it's going to help, you know, bring some of that, I think, startup culture. But really, it's going to be that investment is a forcing function to make sure that you're constantly changing. Look at what's going on in retail. Look at some of the companies that just waited just a little bit too long and thought that they were tackling some of the shift to mobile and digital, but they weren't. They weren't really investing. They weren't moving fast enough. And now the walls are crumbling. CEOs are getting, you know, they're getting fired. And so I would say it's not innovate or get out. I'd say it's innovate or die. And so you have to, things are happening so fast. Look at if you look at the publishing industry, for example, as another one where it's consolidating now. Print, I think you can get very comfortable with the money that you're printing over a period of time, but if you want to stay relevant for a decade or longer, or 20 years or 30, you want to stay around, you don't have a choice because there's other companies that are starting up or other faster moving companies that are bigger that aren't afraid to take those risks and are moving. So I don't think you have a choice. I think you don't want to bet the farm on it. You don't want to bet the entire business on it, but you definitely want to make sure that, and I do think it definitely comes from top down, that's happening.
There's a story from early Google where there were about 60 people in the company, and they all got together And Larry Page got everybody together and he said, what's our biggest cost of the company right now? So people raised their hand and said, is it the food? No, it's not the food. Is it health insurance? It's not health insurance. The rent? No, it's not the rent. Our biggest cost is opportunity cost. So he identified really early that it's what we're not doing. It's the opportunities that we're not getting today. That's our biggest cost. So it's kind of the flip side of risk. It's if you're not taking a risk, you're losing out. It's the cost of not failing, and kind of shaping the discourse in that way, which is doing the same thing, is losing by definition. And that kind of changed the calculus, and maybe can change the metrics that we use as a company to understand whether we're stretching beyond our boundaries.
It's the idea that inaction is not an option.
Right.
Right? I mean, you think about, and everyone
Lack
knows.
of a choice is a choice.
Exactly. Everyone knows the examples of Kodak and Blockbuster, but they're real life examples where they didn't take potentially action on an opportunity that they had, and now we all know where they are.
Super interesting. I've been writing. I got some good notes here. So what I want to do is I want to share a few of these notes, and then I want to give, in our last 5 minutes, the opportunity for the audience to ask us a few questions. Is that okay, guys? Right. So here's what I heard. In the early part of our discussion, we talked about metrics. And I want to propose as a takeaway for all of you that you think about middle management metrics. It's great when the tone at the top is innovate, but it's necessary that the middle level of your organizations have metrics that incentivize taking risks and innovating. 2, we talked about doubling your failure rate. I love that. That is that we need to be in a phase of rapid experimentation and incentivizing that you can fail and that you need to fail fast. And then finally, I just want to repeat the last thing you said about Larry Page, that the biggest cost is opportunity cost. So what I'd like to do is, before we break, turn it over to the audience for 1 or 2 questions from you guys that you can ask our esteemed experts here on the panel. And the mic runners will go, you guys choose, because I don't know where your mics are. There's a mic, and we have a mic on this side too? Good, let's get a question over here right next to the mic. Say your name and where you're from, and then ask a question.
I'm Doug Messer, and I'm from University Beyond. So my question is to all of you. So coming from the startup perspective, and I'm a full believer in working with a company at a Fortune 100 level, that there will be some failures essentially. And my question to you guys is, how can you express that to them from an early stage? That given you are a startup and you are learning and you are lacking key resources, that just because maybe campaign 1 doesn't perform as well as it was anticipated, that this is just part of the learning process?
It's a great question.
So my response is that I think it's a matter of, and once again, if you're lucky in a startup, it's in the same way that people are talking about Kristy being lucky in terms of her management must be enlightened at Unilever. If you're working for a startup where your management or your funders or whatever understand the magnitude of what you're doing and you have patience, I think that when you have that kind of patient leadership, you're learning every step of the way in terms of what you're doing. And going back to the team thing, look, I think I know some things, but there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And there's not one challenge we have with a client or an engagement or whatever that I don't go to our team members and say, look, how would you guys deal with this? And what I'm finding is when we get everyone to get back and forth, we come up with really good solutions almost instantaneously. And the worst thing you can do is if there's a failure of just keep it in yourself and kind of beat up on yourself and say, okay, I got to fix this myself. I think the quicker you can broaden out, pick anyone in your company to talk to about something, and within 2 or 3 minutes, you'll hear something that you'll say, oh, wow, okay, I'll do this next time. And that's helped us a lot, and it could help you too.
I would just say, when you're working as a startup with a big company, have an open and honest conversation right up front and define what success will look like. Because I've seen startups, and I advise some, and I've worked with many over the years, that they will disappear because they put all their eggs into trying to succeed with that one big company, and that's the end of the company when it doesn't work. The flip side is, I think big companies have to understand, you have to define what that looks like so that both sides understand what you're getting into and agree up front. If it's not going to work, agree to walk away before you both put too much time into it, because it's a big commitment on both sides.
I just want to quickly build on that, if that's okay. I completely agree in terms of it's a two-way street. It's not one or the other. So you definitely need to have that upfront, very honest dialogue. And honestly, not just upfront, but throughout the partnership. A couple of our best practices when it comes to partnering with startups. One is that it is a two-way street. Startups help us to do better business, to create better experiences for our consumers, but we also help startups. We actually have a mentorship program within Unilever where marketers can partner with a startup to mentor them through the whole process, because it can be big and ugly and scary at times. The other best practice that we have, though, is the team behind the tool. So it's so important to us. It's not just about that new technology, that new tool that we'll be implementing, but it's who's behind that. So who is that team or that person behind it? That's so important to us. And we really do see ourselves as partners in crime. And so if we believe in you and you believe in us, then we'll help you and you'll help us along the way.
So I'm just going to take a cue from Rachel. We got the zeros on the clock. You want me to take one more, or are we done? Oh, we're getting thrown off. Hey guys, I want to thank you all very much. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for a couple of questions, so we'll gather over here and come see us. Thank you for spending the very end of your 2-day conference with us. And thank you very much to Steve, Kristy, Charlie, Jeff. Appreciate you guys coming on stage. Take care.
It's been 1 week